So what we want to talk about today is cognitivism. Now we are early in this course, and here we are starting to get into this first chunk of the course where we're going to be talking about meta-ethics, and we're going to talk about different views in meta-ethics over the next little while, not for too long. And there are really two sort of main branches in meta-ethics. And if you've seen this chart before, and you should have in this course from previous class, you kind of got a sense of how we're working here. This is the really abstract branch of ethics, what we're calling meta-ethics. Now notice down here, sort of in the left-hand column, there's this arrow going down to normative ethics, because the next branch, which is normative ethics, it sort of takes its impetus out of moral realism here. Okay, so there's the realism bit, and realists then are going to have at least one of the three forms of normative ethics, or be close to one of those, and we're going to get to talking about that later on in this course. We're actually not too far from that into the future here. But sort of blocking that aside, not being confused by that, there are two main views in meta-ethics. And again, meta-ethics literally means sort of the foundation of ethics, or the foundation of morality. Again, here we're talking about, for instance, if you think that a particular action is the right one to do in a situation, like the discussion we were just having, is pulling that lever on the trolley track in order to divert the trolley so that less people are killed. If that's the right thing to do, well, then what is it about the world that makes that morally right? Okay, what is it that makes that a moral fact, if we want to put it in those terms? Then to answer that question, we've kind of gone beyond ethics to meta-ethics. Now we're looking at what is it about the world that even gives us morality? What's the source of morality? What's the ultimate justification, or the reason, or the rationale for our moral claims? Right? This is what's meta-ethics is concerned with. So the first view in meta-ethics that I want to talk about, that we want to think about, is what's called cognitivism. And very basically, cognitivism is the view that moral claims have truth values. Now that may not seem like very groundbreaking stuff, or maybe this is a little bit confusing, and if it is to you, that's okay, because here we're using some technical language, and you may have never heard of even the term truth value. What do you mean by truth value? Do we just mean that it's true? And yeah, for the most part, we just mean that moral claims at least can be true. There are two different kinds of truth values, or put it this way, there are only two truth values, either true or false. If I were to say that it's 27 degrees outside in Hansville, Alabama, I just made a claim, okay? It's not a moral claim. I'm trying to make a claim about the temperature, I guess, or the environment at this point. Well, is that claim true, or is it false? Well, actually, it's false. I told a little fib there. So that claim has a truth value, which happens to be false. So what cognitivism is saying about moral claims is that any kind of moral claim, such as abortion is wrong, or assisted suicide is permissible, or capital punishment is unethical, right? Any of these kinds of moral claims can either be true or false. That's all that cognitivism says. Out of cognitivism, then, you've got two different ways of thinking about how those moral claims get their truth values. Either you can be a realist, and we will get into realism here later on in the course, especially looking at the normative theories that come out of realism, whereas realism is pretty much going to say that what makes moral claims true or false has to do with the actual sort of reality of the world itself. That in this world in which we live, there's a reality to it such that morality is kind of the furniture of it. So just like there's rocks and mountains and trees, there's a moral code that is universal. That's not to say necessarily that everybody knows what it is. So that's would be the hard part, is actually discovering it or figuring it out. But just like it's a tough, hard process of discovering scientific truths about the world, it's a tough, hard process to figure out moral truths about the world. And realism is going to say that indeed what gives moral claim their truth values, that either makes them true or false, is going to be it's just the way the world is. Any questions or thoughts on that so far?
No, sir.
Another view alongside realism is going to be non-realism, and we're going to look at a couple of these theories, I guess maybe later on this week or so. Um, and the idea here is that indeed moral claims have truth values, so it's a branch of cognitivism. But what non-realists are going to say is that what gives moral claims their truth values um, have nothing to do with reality, that is, the universal absolute reality of the world. Either individual people subjectively sort of create their own moral truths, or their own sort of moral truths come out of the culture or the society in which they live, and so that's what makes them true. Um, when it comes to the opposite of cognitivism, and we will look at this a little bit later on in the course, there is a position that is non-cognitivism over here on the right, and they say that moral claims don't have truth values. And one of the more popular theories is emotivism that comes out of that tradition. So what would that look like then? I mean, if a cognitivist is going to say that a claim such as capital punishment is morally wrong, for instance, let's just use that as an example. I'm not saying that it is or isn't, I'm just using that as an example, that claim. Well, what non-cognitivists are going to say is that that claim can never ever be true or false. It doesn't have any cognitive content in that way. So if somebody makes a claim like that, then it may just be sort of an emotional response they have to something, or it may just be an expression of a preference that they have. So those claims can't be true or false. They're just sort of the blah that comes out of people's mouths to just express how they're feeling. So yeah, two big different theories in metaethics about how all that works, for sure. So let's kind of bullet point this. I went over a lot of that chart. So let's kind of bullet point what's really important to understand about cognitivism. Cognitivism affirms that moral claims have truth values, that any sort of ethical claim that you make, a cognitivist is going to say that either it's true or it's false. Okay. Now we have to think about how this works, and I'm going to do my best to try to explain this in an online setting. This isn't the stuff to try to explain. When I have put up here that moral claims are propositions, um, I'm using the term proposition in a way that analytic philosophers use it. And understanding what a proposition is really important for doing philosophy, especially for doing moral philosophy, because the sort of basic unit of analysis where we're looking at to analyze ideas and arguments and stuff really ultimately is at the level of propositions. We're looking at claims, we're looking at statements, okay? Which is another way to think about what a proposition is, right? A sort of a statement. Um, so I could say something, for instance, like, um, the grass outside is green, okay? Now, another riveting claim, I know. Very deep this morning. We are getting, I know. Uh, and making a claim like that, I'm stating a sentence, I suppose. I'm making a statement. I'm making a claim. But that is also a proposition. One of the important things to understand about what a proposition is indeed that it's not a sentence per se, but it's a statement. And what characterizes what a proposition is that it has a truth value. Now, let me throw the rest of this up on the screen here and try to explain this a little bit better. So I've made a proposition there, and what I want to say is that a proposition indeed is a statement, but it's not a sentence. Okay, So what do I mean by that? Well, I have three different sentences here on this slide. The cat is on the mat. Die Katz ist auf dem Teppich. And die Kleid op het Tapijt. Okay, that was weird stuff. I tried my best. So that first sentence is in English. Does anybody want to take a stab at what language that second sentence is?
Is it German?
It is German. Okay, gold star for you today.
Thank you.
What? Yeah, you're welcome. What about the third sentence? Who wants to take a stab at that? Maybe I shouldn't use the terminology take a stab. This is a moral philosophy class and ethics class. We probably shouldn't stab anything. But what might that be? Actually, it is Dutch. It's Dutch. So no big deal if nobody gets that. Um, Now, why am I using all these examples here? I'm using all these examples for this reason. Because these are three different sentences, okay? Three different sentences. But they all express one proposition. In other words, they are all not expressing three different things, at least in their literal sense. All that they're doing is expressing one point, one proposition. So that's why I don't want to say that a proposition is a sentence. So that's a little bit of philosophy nerdery there to try to help maybe understand what we mean by propositions. The best way to explain what a proposition is really that it's the meaning of a sentence. So if I wrote out the sentence, again, for our example, capital punishment is morally wrong. If I wrote that out, that would be the sentence. But at the same time, think about what that sentence would look like. It's a bunch of squiggly lines that make letters, that there's spaces between these different clusters of letters we call words. I'll be using punctuation. I'll be using capitalization. I might even use some italics to try to emphasize some things, right? All of that is just technical symbolism to express a meaning, right? Sentences themselves aren't meanings. They're tools that we use. They're signs and symbols that we use to express meaning. And the proposition is the meaning that's being expressed. So whenever I make a claim, I'm using language, I'm using words, I'm using my voice to express that language, right? Uh, to try to make sense. But the sense of what I'm doing in language, the sense of what I'm doing when I write stuff out is to express meaning that people can understand, they can cognize um, and comprehend. So when we're talking about propositions, we're talking about the meaning of a sentence. We're talking about a statement. And the thing about propositions that's really important to understand is that it's the propositions themselves that have truth values, okay? So we've already moral claims have truth values. Now I'm saying that a proposition has a truth value. This is confusing. What am I talking about? Well, look at it this way. A proposition makes a claim. So the meaning of the sentence capital punishment is morally wrong is going to be the proposition, and it's the proposition itself that's making the claim here. It's the proposition that is true or false. Well, what happens though when we internalize propositions such that we desire them or affirm them in some way? Well, this is what philosophers call propositional attitudes. It's as if you're taking on that proposition and you indeed are giving it credibility by giving your own assent to it. We might even say that that's a really good philosophical definition of a belief. It's your assent, your cognitive assent, your cognitive affirmation of some proposition. It's you saying that you think that it's true, independent of whether or not it actually is true. But a belief is that. I mean, you may believe something, it may not be true. You may not know how to um, even verify that it's true, but you believe it nonetheless. And so it's you saying that you think it's true. Right? Not a bad way of defining what a belief is. So I think with moral claims, there's a lot of that goes on, right? There's a lot of us believing that certain claims are true. No doubt, regarding some of the particular issues we'll be looking at in this course, there's probably a lot of those issues or positions on those issues that you think are true or that you think are false. So you believe them, but maybe don't have the best rationale for it, which is okay, right? We're going to examine some of that in this course. Take a look at that and see where we stand on those particular issues. So yeah, this is a little bit of a head game trying to understand some of these really minute things and very abstract things in moral philosophy. Any questions or thoughts so far, anybody? Can I help clarify something? Maybe you're confused about something and I can try to help clarify it a little bit better.
So, is cognitivism like a moral standard you believe in, and it's true to you, whether or not like how someone else would see it? Like I heard you like use the
Um,
example about the grass is green, but then I see like down here where it says like it's an attitude, which is like a belief or desire, and I'm just kind of think I'm getting the two
well,
confused.
okay. Well, I took a foray away from cognitivism here to try to just explain what a proposition and a propositional attitude is. So I think what the best way to think about this is that since cognitivism is the sort of overarching position that moral claims are true and false, or either true or false, it's not going to say that they're both. That would be a little bit, that'd be a little bit of a paradox, a little bit of a contradiction. Um, what it's going to say then is that any sort of proposition or even propositional attitude. So uh, if we want to say, for instance, that capital punishment is morally wrong, let's say that that's true, just for our example right now. And let's say then that you believe that capital punishment is morally wrong. Then if capital punishment itself is morally wrong, if that claim is true, well, then your belief is true, being the belief that you think that capital punishment is morally wrong. And that's all cognitivism is saying, is that moral claims, whether or not they're propositions on a piece of paper, or that they're those that you internalize cognitively, either as a belief or as a desire, right? You're taking that cognitive content and internalizing it, cognizing it in some way, such that you are affirming it, either through your beliefs or through your desires. And so cognitivism is just simply going to say that those beliefs are going to be either true or false. Does that help answer your question, I'm hoping?
It clarified some. I kind of have understand it a little bit better now. I just kind of got confused when I saw like the example about belief and desire, and then talking about grass, and I just didn't understand how like a belief about grass being green. But I kind of understand it now. How like whereas cognitism as a whole is like truth values, and like your moral
Yeah,
standing on how it plays into it is whether or not that it would be a true value or not.
yeah, or if it's going to have a truth value, either being true or false. I mean, it could be the case that all of our moral beliefs are false. I mean, cognitivism doesn't really care about that. All that cognitivism says is that either they are true or are false. So really, what cognitivism is saying is that moral claims are a lot more than just expressions of your preferences or expressions of your emotions. That's what cognitivism is saying. That there's actually some sort of cognitive meat to the claims we make about morality.
Okay, so like everything is true or false. There's no like gray area. Is what it's
Exactly.
saying.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, that makes more sense
Yeah.
now. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 You're welcome. Having all that sort of behind us, or still being confused by it potentially, um, I want to talk about two theories of truth to sort of help tie all of this in, because this is going to help us think about these issues as we go forward in this course. So two theories of truth here. The first one I want to talk about is the correspondence theory, and understanding this sort of really requires us to have a bit of a grasp about what propositions are, which is what I tried to do. And this is the nice thing about these videos and such. We can go back and look at them later. And if you're not really grasping this stuff totally right now, that's okay. Write these things down, think about them, over the next several days. It takes time to sort of grasp this stuff, to let our brains process this kind of material, especially when we've never dived into this sort of analytic philosophy before. So the correspondence theory of truth is probably one of the more popular ones. Um, and I say that hesitantly only because, let's be honest, it's not like the vast majority of people in the world sit around and think about what the nature of truth is, right? So when I say that the correspondence theory is the most popular one, I don't mean that it's the one that people sit around and say, yeah, I'm a correspondence person, like they do here in Alabama by saying, I'm a Roll Tide person, or I'm a War Eagle person, or me personally, I'm a Go Blue person. That's because of where I'm from and went up there. Um, so it's not like that. It's not like we're sitting around with bumper stickers on our cars saying I'm a correspondent. No, correspondence theory 2020. It's not that. When I say it's what we use mostly, or that it's most popular, I mean it's because I think it's what we sort of intuitively use um, in thinking about the nature of truth, or not even to think about the nature of truth. Again, I don't think we really do that much, but in how we talk about truth and how we assume what truth is. It's definitely what any sort of scientist is going to do, is going to use correspondence theory. So let me explain a few things about correspondence theory and show a rival theory, and then I'm going to illustrate the few images that I have in the slides here to sort of help clarify what's going on. So what correspondence theory is going to say is that the actual object that bears truth, or is a truth bearer, and what I mean by a truth bearer is the object or the thing that is true or false, okay, is going to be a proposition. Now, what did we say a proposition is? It's the meaning of a sentence. So if we really want to be technical, it's not that the sentences themselves are true or false, even though we talk that way sometimes. And it's probably okay to talk that way instead of getting too crazy technical about this. And if we talk that way, it's okay. It's not a big deal. But technically, right, it's the proposition, it's the meaning of the sentence that's going to be true or false. So that's what's true or false. Um, why is that a big deal? Well, because I think it's important to understand that not every kind of thing can be true or false. There are certain things that if you apply the word true or false to and assess it as being either true or false, it would be really confusing because it just doesn't fit. It's something that what philosophers would call a category mistake. For instance, I have a nice big piping hot uh, container full of black coffee that is really suiting me well this morning. I have to say this is fantastic. Uh, this and being able to do philosophy. I mean, these are the bright spots of my morning right now. But it would be really weird if I looked at this mug and I said, this mug is so true. What does that mean? Right? Mugs can't be true. Or if I looked at my mug and said, dadgum, this mug is so false. It's like, well, what am I talking about here? That doesn't apply to mugs. Or to look at the carpet in my office here, which could use a cleaning, by the way. If somebody wants to email somebody anonymously here at the college and say, hey, clean the professor's carpets, I mean, I would love that. But anyway, it would be kind of messed up to look at the carpet and say, my carpet is very false today. Why? Because notions of truth and falsehood don't apply to carpets. They don't apply to mugs. There are ways in which we talk about truth and falsehood too that don't strictly apply, but it's because we're using a sort of euphemism. For instance, we often talk about, or I say we, romance novels and soap operas. Um, we'll talk about true love, right, or a false love, or growing up in Michigan, where bow hunting, for instance, is a very popular sport. Um, I've never actually done any of that, but as a kid, I had a bow and we'd go camping and I would do some archery at targets and we would talk a lot about, how true my shot was or how true my buddy's shot was. Or, a true shot is one that's really well done and hits the bullseye of the target. Well, there, just like with the true love example, I'm not really talking about truth in the literal sense. We're actually using true as a synonym for genuine or accurate in those cases, right? A genuine love or an accurate shot. So we often use the word true there. So that's more of a synonym or even something of a metaphor, I suppose. So I'm not talking about true in that way, even though I guess there are a few things that would use the word true. But here we're talking about The only things that can be true in the literal sense of what truth means are propositions. That's what's true or false. Okay, so if that's what's true or false, then what is it that's going to make those propositions true or false? What is it that's going to give them their truth value? Is it a little green genie that comes out of a box? No, it's not. It's the way the world is for the correspondence theory. So it's reality. So if I had a proposition that said this, there are books on the shelves in Dr. Ball's office. Right? I'm using that proposition right now because I'm looking at a bunch around here. Well, okay, is that proposition true or false? Well, it's true, and the reason is because the way that the world is right now is such that in my office are all kinds of books on bookshelves. So the way that the world is, just the way that reality is right now, has made that particular proposition true. And so notice then that with the correspondence theory, what you get is you get an assumption on behalf of the theory that there indeed is a real and objective world out there that exists. And our particular propositional attitudes about that world, that is the things that we believe about it, okay, can be about that world. And they are either going to be true or false. So why is it called correspondence? I've got some images later on in this slideshow to illustrate it, but I'll just say it right now, and then we can revisit this and dive deeper into it. It's called correspondence theory because the assumption here is that there is a correspondence, a one-to-one correspondence between the truth bearer, that's the proposition, and the truth maker. So when the truth bearer corresponds to the way that the world is, that is to reality, when you have a correspondence between them, then that's when you have truth. Or that's when you can look at that proposition and then assess that proposition as being true, as having the attribute or the characteristic of being true. The other important theory of truth to look at, and let me say this real quick too about these theories. These are important for understanding moral philosophy because you've got some moral philosophers thinking that the correspondence theory, like what is important and useful in science, is indeed just what truth is. So it's going to have to be the case regarding morality as well, that true moral claims are true because the way the world is has made them that way. But you have others too that think that there's really no objectivity when it comes to a real world out there that creates or that has a framework of absolute morality in and of itself. And so they are going to be a bit more cautious about that. And those particular thinkers, and we will encounter a couple, it may not be the easiest to kind of pick out that they hold to this particular view, but you might see some sort of giveaway or keywords that signal that. They're going to believe in the coherence theory of truth, or they're going to be more apt to think that the coherence theory of truth makes the best sense. For a co-theorist, what is it that makes what is it that bears truth? What is the proper object of things that we would call true or false? It's propositions. Okay, so that's why I said earlier that propositions are really the object of analysis. We're looking at these propositions, thinking about propositions in order to understand what's going on here. But here's the major difference. Whereas reality itself, sort of the framework or furniture of the world, is what makes propositions either true or false for the correspondence theorist, for the coherence theorist, what they're going to say is that it's one set of true beliefs that make additional propositions true or false. In other words, for coherence theory, it doesn't really matter. You need not assume that there's a sort of real world outside of me in order to have true propositions. The only condition that you need is that all of those propositions cohere together. And by cohere, what we mean is that there are no inconsistencies there. So having a totally consistent set of true beliefs, that is, of true propositions that I'm assenting to, that I'm believing, that having a coherent set of those is what matters, and that in and of itself will lend truth to new propositions that I believe, insofar as those new ones cohere with the set of coherent beliefs that I already have. So let me illustrate this. And lucky you, I've got a nice side profile image here. I used to write this stuff up on the board, and then I really started scaring people because I draw images that look like aliens that are going to eat up the entirety of humanity. So yeah. Anyway, um, so here's a proposition: a red car is in the driveway. Okay, and I've just I'm illustrating it this way just to sort of help us understand. So notice that this proposition is in this person's head, right? It's in their mind or their brain, whatever you want to say there. And look, out in the driveway, outside of this person's head, out in reality, is a red car. Okay, in the driveway. There's a one-to-one correspondence between this. In other words, the belief that this guy has corresponds to the way that the world is outside of himself. So that proposition is going to be true. Well, what if out there in reality, out there in the world, maybe even next to that car, there's a dog barking? And so this guy forms the belief, that is, he assents to the proposition that a dog is barking nearby. Hey, we've got a one-to-one correspondence. So that proposition then is true. It's accurately reflecting the way the world is. It's accurately mirroring or telling him, representing, whatever synonym you want to use there, accurately representing how the world is. Or somebody has forgot to put their socks in the wash. This guy forms the belief, oh, my gym socks are very potent. There's a one-to-one correspondence, and so bingo, we have liftoff, right? We have a connection here, and thus that proposition is going to be true as well. So here's the correspondence between the proposition itself, and if I'm believing it, if it's in my head like this, and I think that it's true, then it's a propositional attitude, which we call a belief, okay? And if it's corresponding to that which it's actually trying to represent, or which it's trying to cognize, or trying to mirror from the world outside of me, and there's a one-to-one correspondence there, well, then we have truth. That proposition is true. Questions on that? Questions or thoughts, anybody?
So how would the correspondence theory correlate with something like like pro-life or something like that?
What do you mean by pro-life? You mean like regarding abortion?
Yeah. So how could you do the correspondence to know if it's true or not? You know?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it depends on which particular normative theory is going to have a correspondence theory of truth. I mean, the correspondence theory of truth really doesn't tell you how to discover what's true. It's just giving you a theory about what the nature of truth itself is. That when propositions correspond to the way that the world is, then they are true. So let's assume that it's true that abortion is morally wrong, right? Let's just, for the sake of our example here, let's just assume that that is true. What the correspondence theorist is going to say, well, if it's true, it's because that's the way the world is, that there's a moral framework or structure that indeed is part of the world, and that's going to make it true. Now, how you discover that, there's going to be different variations. For instance, we're going to be looking at three normative theories later on. In this course, we're going to be looking at virtue ethics, we're going to be looking at deontology, and we're going to be looking at utilitarianism. Now, interestingly enough, there are philosophers in each of those three camps who think that abortion is morally wrong. Now, there's also philosophers in those camps that think abortion is morally permissible, right? So there's where the conflict arises. But anyway, there's going to be, in all those three camps that think that abortion is morally wrong, but they're each going to have very different ways that they would argue for discovering that truth. So I realize that's not a very satisfying answer, but I appreciate the question because I do think that's helpful to clarify. The correspondence theory of truth is not a theory about discovering truth. It's just a theory about what the nature of truth is. So Notice that in my explanation of the correspondence theory, I was actually assuming something of a theory of discovering these truths about the car, the dog, and the socks. I was sort of implicitly using uh, a sort of empirical theory that is a theory of discovering truth through my eyes, right, by seeing the car, an empirical theory of using my ear perception, audible perception, and hearing the dog bark, and then sensory nasal perception in smelling my socks, which is not something I do often, on purpose anyway. Um, yeah, so I had to assume a theory of discovery in order to explain the theory of truth. So the theory of discovery, virtue ethics, deontology, utilitarianism, those are going to be different, and we will be digging into those to see how that a correspondence theorist, indeed, who is a virtue ethicist or is a deontologist or is a utilitarian, would discover what he or she thinks these truths are. Great question. Anything else or follow-up questions or anything? Anybody?
So does this kind of correlate to like the old phrase, like seeing is believing?
Does this correlate to it? No. Um, I wouldn't say the correspondence theory itself would correlate with that, but that would be more of a sort of an empiricism. Um, Empiricism being the position that the only sorts of knowledge that we can obtain is through sensory perception. In other words, unless your beliefs are rooted in things that you see, touch, taste, hear, or smell, then you really don't have legitimate beliefs. That makes sense.
I have a question.
Yes.
So with the correspondence theory, say whenever you like make a statement or whatever or a proposition like the
Yeah.
red car in the driveway, and
Yeah.
that to you is truth. Well, what if someone disagrees with you? How is their like point of view correct if they disagree with your statement that you see true from your world?
Um, that's a very postmodern statement, isn't it? We live in a postmodern age where I know we're all very confused about truth. Well, somebody's got to be wrong. I mean, that's what the correspondence theorist is going to say. Somebody's wrong. I mean, it can't be the case that I have my truth and you have your truth, and that they conflict or that they're inconsistent, and that it's all good.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we all don't get to define truth for ourselves. If that were the case, then my uncle who's dying of cancer right now wouldn't be dying of cancer. He could just say that, oh, it's not true to me that I'm dying of cancer.
hmm.
Um, I wish sometimes that we could create truth like that, but it's just not the case.
It's reality. Anyway,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah,
Yeah, but that's right, and that's the rub here. And this will make more sense when we move on to this next theory, because some people want to say, well, correspondence theory, okay, that makes sense when it comes to like looking at a red car in the driveway, or that makes sense when it comes to a diagnosis of some illness, or that makes sense when it comes to um, uh, that cop that pulled me over last week and gave me a speeding ticket, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this makes sense, but morality is just so subjective, right? There's no truth there. Everybody just picks their own morality and kind of what fits them. Um, and so some people will try to have it both ways. Now, there's some ways in which there's really no truth and falsehood, but on this stuff, there has to be.
So is
Um,
it, can we say the correspondence theory of truth is just, it's basically, it's all factual based?
Yeah, I mean that's a good way to put it. Yeah, the correspondence theory is going to say that propositions are going to either be true, and if they're true, then they're facts. Sure, they're facts, or they're not facts because they're false. And so what that's going to lend itself to saying then is that if there are moral claims that are true, well then those are facts, and we have moral facts. And again, that's where things get really tense because there's a lot of people, a lot of philosophers, a lot of thinkers, and not even philosophers. I mean, you can turn on the evening news and see all kinds of craziness out there in the world today, of people who would say that there are no moral facts. It makes more sense to say there's scientific facts, especially in an age in which we live in, where science has pretty much become the god of the West. Right? We worship science like crazy. Um, that there are scientific facts, but moral facts, people aren't as comfortable in saying that kind of thing. So yeah, correspondence theory of truth is going to say that propositions are either going to be true or false. What makes them true is that they correspond to reality, a reality outside of myself. So there's no such thing, going back to that first question, there's really no such thing as saying that I have my truth and you have your truth. What correspondence theory says is that what makes things true is reality outside of you. You don't come up with it in your own head. You just cognize it or understand it or comprehend it, what's going on
Right.
outside of your head. These are all excellent questions. What else? What else you guys thinking or concerned about here? Well, let's move on to the next theory then, and have something to kind of contrast this with that might even help us understand it more. The coherence theory, which I already talked about. So let me illustrate how that's going to work. So here are all those propositions, and I think I threw another one in. So I've got a proposition that a red car's in the driveway, and I've also got this one in my head that so all these propositions are beliefs. Let's just say a dog is barking. George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. 2 + 2 = 4. My gym socks are smelly. And we could add thousands upon thousands of other propositional attitudes or beliefs here, along with all of these. So there are all of these, and what the coherence theorist wants to say regarding all of these and whatever thousands more we could add to this image is that so long as there are no inconsistencies here, then they're all going to be true. And whatever proposition then that I add to these when I learn new stuff, however I learn them, through my senses or through reading a book or through just thinking about it and working out the logic in my head, no matter how that I actually come to obtain knowledge, so long as I'm adding propositions to the set of propositions I already believe, and that doesn't conflict with them, then by virtue of cohering with what I already got going on, then they are true. So you can see where this could be a very attractive theory of truth when it comes to things like morality, not so much with science, not so much with medicine, for instance. I don't know if I would want coherence on its own to be the main driving way of thinking about what truth is, because arguably I could have an entire coherent set of beliefs about something that could be false when it comes to reality. I think a really good example of this is, and this is really the sort of most important, I think, objection to coherence theory, the coherence theory of truth, is take a really good book. I often, in explaining this, will talk about Tolkien, the trilogy, The Hobbit, all that stuff. Many of us have seen the movies. I recommend the books. Usually the books are better than the movies. I found that not to always be the case. However, in Tolkien's case, it is. And even I think when I was in junior high, when I started reading those books, even then I was impressed. I think now I'm even more impressed at how amazing they are. For this reason, the guy is not just a phenomenal writer and just captures you in the moment of what's going on. He brings you into the excitement, the tension, the emotion, all that good stuff that good literature writers do. But he pretty much created an entire reality, an entire false reality that you get sucked into. He created a different Earth, right, with these different continents and nations. He created a completely new sort of geopolitical status in the world with all of these fictional lands and leaders and characters, different languages that have a logic to them that actually work. And if you read through all that stuff, there are no inconsistencies. I mean, there have been people in think tanks that have been paid money to go through all of Tolkien's work and try to find the inconsistencies in doing Tolkien scholarship, and they can't find any. Uh, the trilogy, the Hobbits, all of that is incredibly consistent within itself. It is incredibly coherent. But here's the thing about it, it's fiction. In a sense, it's false. That stuff isn't real outside of itself. It has no real bearing in the real world in which we live, right? I can't go to uh, those places that are listed in that book, or meet the people or the descendants of those people, or the culture of those people that are represented in those books. So that really is the problem here, I think, as what I've got with all of this stuff. What makes moral propositions true or false? Things like rape is immoral, or abortion is wrong, or pornography is permissible, or the opposite of these claims, right? Um, is it coherence that is important when it comes to me? But isn't correspondence also important too? So what a lot of people will say is that in a sense you kind of need both. It's not best to just say that my beliefs should correspond to reality, or that my beliefs should cohere together. Um, I think it's important to think about both of these working together when it comes to thinking about the nature of truth, really regarding anything, but especially morality. Um, and here's why. For instance, um, think about, for instance, in the syllabus, that second essay you'll be writing in this course about whether or not um, you can be pro-life and be anti-abortion and also pro-assisted suicide and euthanasia. Um, let's say, for instance, that you think that your positions on these things correspond to the way the world is, right? You think that uh, the way the world is, that humans have dignity, that's intrinsically true. I mean, that's just obvious, intrinsic, and it's an absolute truth. It's part of the structure of reality. So taking lives unjustly would be immoral. And you think that abortion is a way of doing that. But maybe you also think that someone in a late stage of cancer who's suffering a lot of pain should have the right to end their own life, to take a suicide pill. Um, it would seem that even though you think that your positions correspond to the world it would seem that it would seem that there's a problem here, because they, on the surface, they don't seem like they're coherent with one another. It seems like you're going to be pro-life on one of those issues, but not pro-life on the other issue. And I'm not saying that that's actually what you're doing. That's what it seems like anyway. Um, so you would need to explain there how it is that those different positions, or your beliefs about those different positions, are coherent within your set of beliefs. And I think that's where a course like this is helpful, because we have all kinds of opinions on all kinds of things. But what we actually really need to be able to do is show that how they all work together and cohere together. So what makes moral propositions true or false? Is coherence important, or is correspondence important? And there's really the two rival answers that we're going to start getting into further on in this course now. And I kind of went over them a little bit earlier in this lecture, but there's moral realism and there's moral non-realism. And basically what these positions are this. For realism, the truth value of moral propositions, that is, of these moral claims that we're making, is determined how those propositions correspond to objective features of reality. That indeed there is a moral world out there, just like there's a scientific world out there outside of ourselves. And that when our moral claims are true, it's because they correspond to that reality. Again, realists are not making claims that it's easy to discover them, or it's a piece of cake to discover them, that you just point them out like you would point out your grass to figure out what color it is and then represent that in some sort of proposition. I'm not saying that it's easy or anything like that, but just saying that the nature of morality is such that there is a real structure of morality out there. And when our moral claims are correct, it's because they correspond to them. Or when they're wrong, it's because they are not corresponding to them. And then you've got moral non-realism. And what moral non-realism is going to say, what it says, is that the truth value of any moral claim, that is, the truth value of being true or false, like abortion is wrong. It might be true, it might be false, but what the non-realist is going to say is what makes that claim either true or false is going to be determined by some sort of human construction. It's going to be made up, either by personal individuals or culture and society. So the moral non-realist kind of wants to have it both ways by saying, indeed, that there are truth values to moral claims, but what makes those claims true or false isn't the objective world outside of us. It's not some feature of the world that makes these claims absolute, right? You'll never find it out there because it doesn't exist. Rather, we create morality, we create ethics. Um, and what non-realists will say is that historically that's been done through culture, through society, through religion, through all these things that a lot of non-realists would say are mere human constructions, and nothing more than that. It's just people making this stuff up. Um, Living a little bit more now in a secular society in the West, as we have been on that trajectory now for several decades. Um, Much more so in Europe, places like Europe and Canada, and I think a lot of places in the U.S. are really catching up now. Um, we're living in an age more of sort of personal morality being, uh, how do I want to put it, sort of being the reigning way of thinking about, or of expressing non-realist positions about morality. That so much of morality really is sort of personal preference. It's true or false because you make it true or false, and at the same time, you really are only making it true or false for yourself. So it's a very sort of postmodern, individualist, subjective way of thinking about this. Um, Although I realize that that's not always what comes across as true, especially when you look at various uh, projects and various movements throughout our culture now of certain factions of all kinds of places, uh, points in our country of people talking about certain sorts of moral things or being absolute and universal, um, um, and then others being more subjective, right? That seems pretty arbitrary to try to point out, well, this is absolute and moral and this is more subjective and personal and individual, without really giving us a whole lot of principles or a good argument at least as to why that's the case. But anyway, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that. You've got two things here. So really, way to think about it is that moral realism tends to think about truth in the correspondence way, and non-realists tend to think about truth more in the coherence way, right? And here's where they are on the slides here. So let me, we've got a few minutes here. Let me, pose this problem. So what should we do now? We've got the realism, we've got the non-realism, we've thought about the nature of truth as it relates to these problems. So should we think of morality as being a real thing? It's out there and it's for us to discover what it is, or not a real thing? That is, it's artificial. We create it for ourselves or for our cultures or for our people artificially. So let me look at this real quick while we've got a few minutes left. It's called Robert Nozick's Experience Machine, and I'll just give you a quick summary of it. I've got an image posted here of it, and here's how this. It's a thought experiment, and here's how it goes. Let's say that you were given the opportunity, and this is a kind of a creepy photo, I know. You were given the opportunity to uh, have any kind of experience that you want. Okay. Um, what you have to do though is to go into the machine and have this, this stuff put on your head, uh, cover your eyes, right? It's this machine, all kinds of electric stuff is going to go into your brain, and it's going to give you whatever experience you want. So, I mean, your wildest fantasy, who, if you had this ability, I mean, what would you do? What would you pick? Let me throw that out there to class. What would you do? Who wants to tell me what you, if you could have any experience, and please keep it rated G, okay? What experience would you want to have if you had the opportunity to have any experience that you could, this machine would give you?
Most definitely drive a Lamborghini.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, I like that. Drive a Lamborghini. What else?
Like fly,
J
like Superman.
J did the rolls. Fly like Superman to actually be able. Yeah, that's. I never thought of that. That would actually be pretty cool too. Jade
Mhm.
says drive a Rolls Royce. What else we got?
It would probably like be able to like breathe underwater almost like Aquaman and like go explore a lot of the ocean that like it's not like been
Ah,
discovered.
so to be able to explore for hours upon
Hmm.
end the ocean without needing scuba gear or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think it'd be neat to experience society without any kind of racism or any kind of prejudice or anything, see what it would actually be like if it would be as utopian as you think.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. So if we were to take utopian philosophers at their word and actually sort of experience it, what would that be like to experience a society as they've laid out? Yeah, the world that Marx wrote about back in the late 19th century, where everything is owned in common by the workers. What would that really look like? Yeah, that's interesting. Jade says read minds too. Oh my gosh, I don't know. That would scare the crap out of me. I think if I could read
Yeah,
people's minds,
I wouldn't want to know.
probably go
I wouldn't
crazy.
want to know.
Yeah, some things maybe not, but I don't know. I mean, that's pretty intriguing. If I could read people's minds, I could probably. Remember that movie? I think Mel Gibson was in that movie some years ago. About he had the ability to read women's minds.
Hmm.
His character did, and he made $1 million off of it or something. You know, that's probably what I would do. Read people's minds. I'd know what they would buy, and so I would figure out a way to sell it to them. Um, yeah, these are all really interesting. So here's how this thought experiment goes. Now that you all have thrown that out there, would you rather have the experience of doing these things, or would you actually rather really do these things? In other words, would you rather just be in this machine having the experience of driving a Rolls or a Lamborghini or flying or or diving deep into the oceans for hours on end, or would you actually really like to do these things and not it be a mere experience that's being plugged into your brain?
Really do it.
I'd like
Question is
I'd like to truly do it.
Truly do it. Yep.
okay. Well, that's what Nozick thinks that your response is going to be. So now let's think about that in terms of morality. Would you really like to have the mere experience in the machine, for instance, of not being raped, of not being murdered, of having people help you, of having structures in place where there are certain rules of etiquette, to make our lives better? Would you like the mere experience of that, or to really, in the real world, not be raped and murdered and have people treat you well? And Nozick thinks that our response is probably going to be the same way. No, we would really, really like that to be real, to be a real part of the reality of the real world in which we live. So, what does that say about us? Well, I think what it says about us, what Nozick thinks it says about us, is that our assumption, and indeed the way in which we operate on the world, is that there is a real world, and that morality itself is a real thing because we want it to be a real thing. We assume it's a real thing, and we live daily as if it's a real thing. So anyway, something to think about. And so when we think about further this problem that we just recently introduced, the trolley problem, then we got to think about it now in terms of reality. If that's really what morality is part of, what is the actual real moral fact here? that it's correct, that it's morally right to pull the lever and to actively kill one person in order to save five, or not do anything, to not get ourselves involved at all whatsoever, and allow five people to be killed instead of one. And again, this is where people are going to have different opinions, and all of that is going to come down to what it is exactly you think is the right way to figure out what the right answer to this question is, which we'll be getting into later on in this course. All right, so what final thoughts or questions, concerns, clarifications, anything like that do you have? We've got about 5 minutes or so here.
Nozick experience machine, like I think like really clarified like how morality like really is a thing. Like when you're talking about the whole like if you could experience anything, and then went to like
Yeah.
the not being raped. I'm like, yeah, I guess that definitely like makes you realize that it really does exist. To like be like, that's not like where I was expecting that to turn when you brought in the second half of that question, like where it was
Mm-hmm.
actually like a real thing. You're like, yeah, well, I guess that definitely like showed because like everyone, I feel like you just kind of like, okay, yeah, I definitely see like where that brought it all together. Like that example was like a really, I feel like shocking. Like, hey, this is actually a thing. Like it kind of made me
Yeah.
realize that there is like the question of morality kind of became like, was it really not a question now when like you talk about like this experience, that experience machine? I thought was a really good example of like the point that the Nozak was trying to make.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad it was helpful. Yeah, because I think when we really sort of question, what our purposes is, what we want in the world in which we live, um, in a sense, even for civilization, we need to appeal to a real morality. Again, not saying it's easy to figure out what that is, but we operate, we on this world, right? We do our stuff in this world. We live in this world, needing for there to be uh, sort of absolute, objective, moral facts. Or at least I think we do.
Is that something like, just like with the creation of education or anything else like that, at the baseline, like the caveman, there were no morals. It was kind of kill or be killed or something like that. So even though we've advanced and whatnot and created things like that, even though it seems like an artificial construct, does that make it reality because we've developed to that point?
Is that a question? So you're asking, have we essentially created it because we developed to that extent?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Um, all that's going to sort of depend too on your particular views of anthropology, of the origin of humanity and all of that. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that, my personal thoughts on that, because frankly they're irrelevant, irrelevant to this. But yeah, I don't know if the realist is going to go that far. I mean, maybe one way of thinking about it. I think the more basic point there is going to be that humanity itself indeed needs for there to be moral objective. It's almost like the very framework of our minds are structured to appeal to absolutes, scientific absolutes, moral absolutes, all these different objective absolutes, which is you could argue is true. Just for you know I needed it to be absolutely objectively true that my coffee was not going to poison and kill me this morning, right? Uh, I need for it to be absolutely objectively true that the water I drink throughout the day is not going to kill me, because I need water, and that would be pretty messed up if I need water at the same time, to be hydrated, and at the same time water's deadly. That'd be a cruel trick, right? So all kinds of absolutes we have to rely on, we assume, in order to exist and to live well, right? To flourish as humans, and we're going to talk about human flourishing, especially when we get to Aristotle. Um, And so what the realist is going to say is that definitely, right, that's going to be the case with morality. And sure, I think we understand these things better. I suppose as a species of human beings, the smarter we get, I would hope that's the case. But even just the kind of work that we're doing here, for sure, looking into this stuff and thinking about it at this level. Yeah. They're really interesting, good thoughts. That's some good quality stuff. Other thoughts, questions?
So do we have any like homework or anything to submit other than our essays?
Have you read the syllabus?
Yeah.
Okay. Then you know that there's 3 different things to do in this course, right? There is the syllabus quiz, there are the essays, and there are 3 exams. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to ask if I could real quick the rest of the class. Has anybody else had trouble signing on to the virtual classroom? I'm having trouble at saying that my Chrome is not up to date, not updated and everything. I had to get on with my iPad this morning.
No, mine's been working fine. I know with the iPads, it's not always compatible, but it works a little bit, but not 100%.